and then I just press continue and you're on.
Great. So it looks like we're live. So welcome to the next event in our repair forum. It's a Q&A with three alumni from the MA Illustration Authorial Practice, Emma Burleigh, Chloe Bonfield and Louise Bell. And hopefully you've all watched their talks, or if you haven't, this can be an introduction to their talks. And yeah, welcome guys. I'm not going to try and recall exactly when you all left the course, but I know that you come from quite different years, so there's quite a sort of span between us all here. So what I'm going to do, I've got a few questions from me, from one or two from existing students, and we've got a Q&A thread for those listening. So do drop in a question, and even if someone just drops in one question, we'll know the app's working, so that would be good to know. So if you bring in your questions, we'll try and weave those in as we go. So I'm going to start with a question for it's a really hard one for you, Emma, straight away from Rosie Hearn, one of the current MA students. Rosie says, I'm interested in how you brought your practice into your therapy sessions. I'd like to do that myself, but not sure how, as I'm worried one might get in the way of the other. Do you have any advice on cross-fertilizing therapy and your creative practice?
Hi, Rosie. Yeah, that's a really good question. I don't feel like one's ever got in the way of the other for me. I actually feel like they've enriched each other. You know, like it's been a much richer creative practice for me because I've done that. You know, I feel like for quite a long time I was sort of pretty blocked creatively, and it's because I wasn't really willing to feel a lot of feelings, or didn't feel safe to. So it's really, you know, when I went into therapy, that I felt able to actually express myself in a more open, vulnerable, uncensored way. But I guess what I would say is that's great, you know, to have a sort of richer well to draw from, because you're more in touch with your own feelings and inner experience, and that can feed your practice. But there's definitely a distinction between what you would choose to share with the world and what would just be your personal practice. And I really like something my friend Rachel Ball, who you might have heard of, she's a graphic novelist who also co-runs Ladies Do Comics, but she says, you know, once you've sort of got all your stuff out and you've, you know, got this kind of creative mess on the page, then she engages the psychopath in her inner psychopath. And by which I think she means a sort of cold, judgmental, unfeeling part of herself that goes, yeah, okay, this is really sad, but like, does it work as a story? You know, what do I need to cut out ruthlessly, even though I like it, because that will be boring for other people, or that just doesn't serve the whole story arc, or whatever it is you're trying to achieve. But I think it's really important to keep that colder, more judgmental part of yourself out of the creative process, certainly for me, in my experience, for quite a long time. You know, like that's the editor, the judge. Bring that in later. Don't bring it in at the beginning, because then you won't be able to do anything. Yeah, I think that's all I want to say.
Lovely. Yeah, that's a great answer. Thanks. I think there's going to be plenty of other people sort of picking up that sort of back and forth as well. So I was trying to decide where to go next, because I've got two questions that are about those kind of you know, in terms of authorial practice, how we understand that, the kind of the edges that we have around that with other forms of practice. And it came up with Aidan and Maren towards the end of the conversation. They were talking about sculpture. I'll go with Louise first, but I was thinking particularly for Louise and Chloe, and any of you might want to speak to this, but I wanted to talk about curation first, because I know Louise and Chloe, I think of you very much as curators in how you present what you do, and right back to when you did your own masters, curation seemed a big part of it. But maybe starting with you, Louise, you put it really nice. I can't remember exactly how you put it, but my memory of it was that you that the curation becomes a space where you think the work. It's not just, you know, that it's like the work comes into being, and there seems a real continuity between that and what happens within the page of a book, even, or the space of a book, or so. Anything about the relationship?
Yeah, right. I mean, it's definitely the same as, well, for me, it's definitely the same as working within a sketchbook, and even if you were placing images within a book, it's the relationality that goes on between them and the gaps, how much gap to leave, that breathing space. And it's the same process, really, just on a larger scale, outside of the confines of a book, within exhibition space, within like a specific series of walls and floors. But yeah, I mean, it's a bit of a side note, but to go back to what that conversation Hugh was having with Aidan and Maren yesterday in terms of sculpture. I mean, I think we've had this conversation has been had for what, 10, 15, 20 years, of who defines the parameters of what illustration is, and why are those parameters there? Why does an illustration need to be static and flat? I don't think two-dimensionality is a prerequisite for an illustration. It's just a different way of viewing and a different way of presenting and representing. And I think other forms of practice, such as curation, such as writing, perhaps some sort of performance like walking within my own practice, there's these slippages, and there's no reason why they can't inform each other, personally. But yeah, that's just my kind of grind about the preconceptions of illustration being images and text, particularly within commercial aspects. That I mean, I'm not saying that those aren't necessary and those aren't valid, but I think we can think beyond those standards, and there are other availabilities in terms of illustration.
Thank you, Louise. That's great, and let's just mark that before jumping that question over to Chloe. But is I didn't think of that. It's a really nice basic question that I'd love to hear your answers to, all of you, really, which is just really, you know, what do we all understand by illustration or authorial illustration? You know, those are, because I think that we can almost just slip into taking it as a given, like we're all talking about the same thing. But Chloe, do you want to say anything, or you, Emma, about curation? And you go first, Chloe. But
yeah, sure.
Curation is part of your thinking.
Yeah, I think that definitely for me, the performance part is really important in my practice. But there's this kind of what Emma was talking about with, you know, therapy and work, and having these different kind of threads and how they all mix together. So if I'm doing research, I'm looking kind of specifically at research. If I'm doing my own practice, I'm probably doing a more kind of writing and looking at dreams and that kind of side of things. And then you've got this space in between where you can show the work, and I like to make performance in that kind of space. So then the kind of curated space normally ends up just serving that. So it needs to be designed to work in that situation. And I think that's the same with like an exhibition. It's all about kind of making it, and yeah, like Louise said, it's the same as editing a book, the space of the pages. So yeah, there's that similarity, but it is something that for me I find quite hard to reconcile all of the research threads when I'm thinking about curation, books, performance, and whether to have them all kind of separated out, look at each one individually, or, you know, it's kind of a bit of a nightmare to put all those things together in a succinct kind of helpful way within illustration. So yeah, I feel your pain, Louise, that you're but it's also really exciting and interesting place to be thinking about things. And for me, before before I thought about illustration and this kind of other practice being the same thing, I found it really hard to curate it. But now that I've got a framework, the curation comes as part of a process-driven thing.
Yeah.
So that's like really satisfying, and kind of that process-driven aspect can help to drive the whole practice forwards. And I think that the MA helped with that. Just looking at like the Aleppo and all of these kind of things that before I was a bit adverse to, I thought they were too restrictive, and finding a lot of freedom in those restrictions was helpful. Yeah, I think that kind of bit of a tangent. But
I don't. I'll broaden out in a sec, and welcome. Great to see you're in the room too now, Fern. Well done. But we've got all of us here, which is a fantastic achievement given a Teams Live event. So talking about curation, then I think there's a kind of assumption for me with curation that it's quite outward facing, it's quite audience facing. There's a sense with curation for me that we're in a space where the work is or will be soon in conversation with someone else, and I really like that you both immediately started to create a slippage between curation and performance. And like Louise was mentioning, walking, and Chloe, I think of performance, what you said about, again, I might have translated this into my own kind of way of talking about it, but I recall you talking about words as spell casting and the kind of world making, and the idea that language literally, in some quite sort of empirical sense, it sort of remakes our experience. And I thought with you too, Emma, and I wondered if any of you would like to speak to this. This could include anything from kind of formal spiritual practice to the need to walk in order to think, or if you like, kind of contemporary magic. Do you have zones within your creative practice where there are kind of performances that may or may not involve someone else, but they're a kind of generative tool that's part of what you do? Do you want to come in first, Emma, and then we'll just see if anyone else wants to pick it up?
Okay. So things I do to kind of help my practice along. I'm a bit. What do you mean by performative?
Yeah. Well, I was thinking, Chloe, for instance, I know has a very permeable border. At least, I mean, we haven't talked about your work in the last few months, but that edge between enacting things in order to think about them, a sort of ritual space where you create some kind of performance, and it being for other people is not the only context that happens. I just wondered if you have.
Okay. I'm completely frozen by the idea of performance, because I find acting absolutely like the most terrifying thing. I have like nightmares where I'm on stage and I have to perform.
It doesn't necessarily mean that.
Yeah, okay.
I think Emma, to translate it for you, I think the best would be process, a way of processing things.
Yeah.
Okay. How do I process things? Yeah, I mean, like I do have like Matt mentioned spiritual practice, so like yoga. I do yoga every day, and it's really good for just sorting out my nervous system and clearing away a lot of inner critic stuff, which tends to be quite strong in me in the morning. So if I do yoga before I start any artwork, that really helps. I try and go for a walk every day just to keep my mental health buoyant. I definitely kind of struggle with like getting stuck a lot with creative practice, especially when I lose momentum, which happens because life happens and there's other things you have to do in life. So yeah, getting started is really hard for me. So yeah, I think things like trying to have little daily practices which support my mental health and my physical health, walking, yoga, getting out in nature. I live in a city and it feels even more important now I live in a city to do that because it's not as ambiently there. All those things really support me then being able to enjoy a practice without getting crippled by self-doubt and self-hatred. I don't know if that really answers your question,
Yeah,
but
it does. It answers it very well, and it actually links to another question I'll ask in a sec. But that's great, and you got the spirit of the question exactly. It was quite a vague question, anyways. Do anyone else want to pick that one up before I kind of roll on?
I was going to say something about the something that you said, Emma, in your talk about when you went on the silent retreat and the struggle you had for those first few minutes. And yeah, that's something about that reminds me of, it sounds a bit sadist, but if I'm performing something or showing my process, there's something in there about being vulnerable and like in the moment and actually struggling a bit that helps me to, helps me to find something. That, I don't think that's exactly what the whole performance is, the whole thing is about, but it's like part of it. And I haven't really explored it properly, to be honest. It's just something that I've kind of like, everyone I think can kind of get and kind of relate to, that kind of thing. And especially when you're kind of supposed to be a certain thing, you know, as well, when you're talking about the Pandora's box and the idea of the kind of good person. And I think like part of that is in the performance as well. It's like showing your just being kind of vulnerable in front of people, but then actually maybe not succeeding and failing in what I'm trying to do. All of that kind of goes into it. So yeah, I found something quite nice in that, because yeah, there's a lot of pressure to be kind of healthy in your mind every day, like you're saying. It's actually quite hard to do. And not possible actually, so yeah. Tangent, so
Nice. I like the way it's going up in completely different directions here as well. Louise, do you want to say anything about, because you've mentioned performance once and you mentioned walking, and I wondered whether in relation to walking or anything else, that sense of a kind of need to physically do things in order to have a space to think, that I was sort of fishing around with.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the work that I made on my PhD, so it's a kind of a broad examination of a city on two sort of different timescales, like within contemporary cityscape of Plymouth, and trying to gain some sort of approximate understanding of the city pre-Blitz, when my grandfather was a young man. And so for me, those walks, they have multiple purposes in that they are kind of a very physical way of embedding myself within the location in like a very bodily way. And also it's sort of, well, it's literally mirroring the action that he would have done habitually when he was a young man. And therefore it's kind of performing that post-memorial acting out, and therefore like physically and empathically trying to gain some sort of familial connection, all the while knowing that that's not possible. But it's I think what's kind of, I'm edging towards what Chloe was saying of making those attempts, and even when that fails, or even if you know it's going to fail because there's an insurmountable distance of time and death and loss and all those sorts of things, it's important to keep trying. And that's those impossible attempts, that's what's very human. And I think that's what's really important in terms of what illustration can bring. It can bring those, I mean, I'm not being very eloquent about this, but which isn't very good because I'm meant to be writing about this, but bringing that kind of embodied experience and then somehow translating it in terms of image making, that's a really interesting process to have. And then sometimes that's not possible, and it's kind of dealing with that dilemma of what can be translated and what can't, and then so finding different ways of presenting that either through writing, photography, or just the event of that investigative process in itself. And that happened, and I can write about that experience, but I can't turn that into a drawing, for instance. I don't know if any of that makes sense or answers. That was rambly, but
great. Absolutely, no, you all got it, and that's really helpful. And what's enjoyable here is, on the one hand, you're creating new questions that we can now run with, but also all my other questions are completely falling apart because you're basically already answering them in different ways. I'm just having to completely make this up on the job. So it's great. Thank you, Fern. Welcome. Lovely to have you with us. And we've got a question from Anna for you, but Anna's is quite kind of related to materials, and I feel like we're opening up in some sort of big sweeps, and I'd really like to get into the kind of more granular process of practice in a minute. But Fern, I wanted to start more in the spirit of the other questions with your talk was one of three, it was yours and Amberley's and Fahana's in different ways that all really brought up for me the importance of enjoyment and the importance of, I think, when you were talking about fantasy and when you were sharing Loca's story, the sense I got from it was that the value of just having a space where there is a kind of sweet relief in just creating something really just pleasing to the mind and heart. And you were talking about negotiating, again, I might be slightly just sort of remembering this, reinventing it and remembering it, but I remember you talking about, yes, there is the ecological crisis and there's this kind of sense of overwhelm around that, but in a more immediate and practical personal way, there's also, you were talking about negotiating the kind of exacerbated mental health challenges under a pandemic and the kind of pressure you're under around that. And I really liked what you said about the space to just open up the work as a space of enjoyment. And I wondered if you wanted to say anything more about that, or how that's helped you this year, or how that helps you turn towards the work in a way that's generative.
Hello everyone. Sorry. Well, I do have yeah, I guess I could say that it has helped me tremendously. It's just, I think it's similar to how you do yoga, Emma, and also Louise, how like the walking. For me, it's just when I put the pencil on the paper, it's just the act of mark making kind of helps me deal with everything around me. It just takes me into the work. And as I go along and build everything, it's kind of like I'm creating a new world of space that I can just be myself and just enjoy it, even though there's like a lot of things happening around me. It's kind of helped calm me down in a way. So yeah.
Brilliant. Yeah, that came across really nice, and I think you talked about that when you were here as well. But it just came through really strongly in that talk. Does anyone else want to throw in any thoughts about the role of enjoyment, or anything else they've encountered in that respect from other talks this week? I wondered if anyone else picked up on that in what Amberley was saying. And
I thought that Fahana actually mentioned like pleasure activism. That was
pleasure activism, yeah, new phrase to me. Interesting. Yeah. You could feel people jotting that one down on their reading list.
Yeah, it's a bit like kind of self-care and stuff like that, but that sounded really interesting.
Yeah, I'd like to say something actually. I kind of I feel like I might have made my whole practice sound a bit like torturous, and I'm always like wrestling the worst kind of feelings out of myself to make art, and it's all really difficult. And sometimes it did feel a bit like that, because I kind of plunged in there with trying to write a graphic novel about probably the sort of deepest trauma in my life, and that's what I've been focusing on, you know, with my talk. But actually, what came out of trying to do that work was realizing I needed a completely different practice to go alongside it, which was a much more joyful fun, nourishing self-care practice. And I've actually already I've not finished my graphic novel, but I have written a whole other book, which is basically about a practice which is joyful, nourishing, fun, comforting, helps you connect with yourself. And this really just came out of trying to support myself to write my graphic novel. So, and I teach this, and this is also very much the backbone of my teaching practice, this kind of approach. So yeah, I just realised, oh yeah, I left that massive piece out about what I do. So thank you.
Fantastic, nice plug as well. That would be good to look at stuff. So let's. I'm totally losing my way with pre-planned questions, and so if you're feeling lost, it's probably my fault. But I think that it would be nice to just make. We still got half an hour, and I'd like to turn maybe a bit more. In, like I said, in a more kind of granular way towards the kind of why we do the particular things we do and the form of practice we have. And Emma, if we keep you on screen for a minute, I was thinking we're talking a lot about processing trauma and recovery, and that theme was really strong, but in a really simple way as well. You're processing memory, you're processing autobiography. And it seems to, one of the things I'm really interested in kind of graphic literature, graphic memoir has become this sort of real, it's almost like a sort of subgenre of graphic novel, isn't it? And I don't know if it's relevant, but I seem about 90% of the graphic memoirs I encounter are by women. And I don't know if that's relevant, but I wondered if there's anything for you on any level, why graphic literature as opposed to painting or writing, and the things, because I think we talk a lot about the things it allows in terms of processing experience and memory. Yeah, what's this thing with graphic literature?
What an interesting question. I mean, I literally have no idea. I've never really thought about it. I got very drawn to this group called Ladies Do Comics because they have a focus on autobiography and personal memoir and sharing women's stories. And, I felt that was like a real interesting approach because there's so many, I guess there's so many stories that women have which are kind of seen as more personal, but actually have a political ramification, like the sort of domestic sphere. But yeah, why graphic novels? I really don't know. I mean, I guess, women write more fiction generally, don't they, than men? I don't know if women write more prose memoir than men. I actually don't know. But, obviously comics is still sort of, well, maybe it's not trying to shake it off, but there is a sort of reputation, isn't there, in comics that it's very male. And that it's a lot of superheroes and things, and obviously that's not really where most people who do the MA at Falmouth are coming from. But we're a bit indie and niche, aren't we? So I guess we're bringing a more feminine approach or more feminist and feminine interests into the genre of graphic novels, which has traditionally been more male dominated, and the subjects have tended to be more, I don't know, sci-fi and superheroes. Yeah, but I don't know. I feel a bit nervous of speculating about why I think women do.
Is it perhaps something to do with sorry? Is it something perhaps to do with presenting vulnerability? We've already spoken about that briefly. I mean, I don't want to make gendered stereotype cliches, but that does seem to have been a more female-centric thing in terms of presenting your own vulnerabilities in the past. So maybe that has something to do with it.
Yeah, I mean, maybe topics which generally are more shared between women, both orally and informally, as well as through cultural products. They are, women are moving into the genre of graphic story making more than they used to. But we've we've always been writing stories that are emotional and vulnerable, and you know, and obviously some men do that too, but it probably is statistically true that more women engage with those kinds of stories more often.
It would be really nice to see a lot more kind of vulnerable male voices.
Yeah.
So that would be.
Yeah, and they are there, but they're maybe fewer. Yeah.
Did any of you overlap with an MA student called Sarah Begum at the time?
Yeah, she was in my year.
Yeah, and because Sarah introduced me to this conversation, and her dissertation around, if I've got the first name right, I think it's Eileen Kaminsky-Crumb, and that kind of New York comic scene, and Eileen Kaminsky-Crumb being Robert Crumb's partner, speaking in a raw way about the kind of actuality of her life, and getting a very different public cultural response to Robert Crumb for crossing certain edges. I thought it was really, really interesting. So I think it's a really interesting one about stereotyping. I guess we all negotiate stereotypes, don't we? So there's if men tend to share less vulnerability, that's just, isn't it? It's because we've learned because they've learned. And yeah, I think it's being unlearned fast, isn't it? What about? I didn't want to sort of tie the legs together too much of that graphic literature question and gender, although I think it's a really interesting aspect of it. But Fern, just in a more general way, you know, as someone who tells stories in words and pictures, do you have anything? Does anything come to mind about why that form as a storyteller really appeals to you more than others?
I think it's because words and images are one of the few things we kind of got introduced in our lives, I think. Since there's like technology comes after books and writing, and I think that's why we are drawn to more. I think we are often drawn to words and images more when it comes to like telling stories and stuff. I think performance also is closely like up after the words and images. I don't know if that make any sense or if you agree with that.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, I think that's been really swimming around everyone's talks. One of the things I've got more questions here, including some from students, but I wanted to make sure that we have a kind of unhurried space for any questions you've brought for each other as well. And I know, Louise, do you want to start? Because I know you said, oh, I've got questions, but
oh yeah, loads.
But I just wondered if you guys would like to actually put out questions to each other in response to what you've heard and seen.
Yeah. So, well, firstly, I just thought that there was like a really interesting breadth of ideas and ways of expressing very personal themes and different forms of illustration. I definitely saw that there was like a really nice correlation between Fern's and Emma's in terms of like emotional truths and that kind of slippages between fact and fiction, and I suppose I think I sort of wrestle with that as well to some extent, and the sort of malleability of memory. And Chloe, I was really interested in how you talk about meaning being generated by dislocation and like the movement of images into discs, and I loved that image as well, and particularly in terms of the bees creating honey, because obviously honey is like a very traditionally a medicinal substance to, you know, prevent bodily corruption and you know, gangrene and stuff like that. So I really liked that kind of contradiction between the violence of a helmet, but also the kind of the protection of and the healing aspect of the honey. And so it's almost like pre and post trauma and damage and healing happening all within one composite. And I suppose those kind of concepts probably come up with both Fern and Em. It's like that, how the image making is a way of processing some sort of trauma and a means of self-healing. I don't know if that was very sort of succinct, but there was just impressions that I sort of gathered while watching your great talks.
Yeah, that's really nice, and I like that's a nice translation of questions. Is a bit sort of demanding. Just impressions is a good way of saying it as well. Just thanks, Louise. Anyone else want to come in there just to that unspecified space of just stuff that's come up this week?
I'd just like to, yeah, what you were talking about, Louise, is also relevant in your work. I mean, that kind of bridging a gap over time, but with the healing trauma by, you know, working a story over it. So yeah, it's actually, yeah, it's quite, I mean, I guess we're working here in the kind of idea of repair, and I think, yeah, all of our practices actually link like that. And I hadn't thought explicitly of what I was thinking about like that before this forum. Actually, it's quite nice. Yeah, it's quite nice, kind of crystallizing, which is cool. Yeah, I don't have a question to lead on.
No, that's great.
Matt,
Really?
can I just jump in very quickly? We have had a couple of questions in the Q&A. I don't know whether you can see them.
No, I can't actually. Do you want to? I don't know. I'm trying to refresh it, and it doesn't.
Okay.
Maybe you could like to throw in a question.
If
Nigel?
you want, I can just read them out.
Yeah, give us one at a time.
Yeah.
You can just be.
Yeah. So this is a question for Louise from Martha Andrews. So something that really stood out to me from your talk was that journeying on foot is a method of reading a city's character. In this kind of exploratory narrative, how much does your own experience and story feed into it? Basically, can it be autobiographical? Can it be an autobiographical experience? How much of yourself do you project into the cityscape?
Well, that would be revealing. That's really interesting. It kind of, throughout the project, it's sort of oscillated in and out of how much I give of myself. So essentially, when I first started, there was that connection with, you know, with my grandfather, and that was the familial link that connected, that I was kind of contending or consolidating. But and then I became very aware of, I don't want to be navel gazing. I think I got a bit overwhelmed with the preoccupations of a PhD, and it needs to be, you know, you get caught up with things like original contribution to knowledge, and you think, oh, it can't be about me, and my I suppose that things with academia, that sometimes you're given the impression that there isn't space for vulnerability, and you kind of move back into things like measurable outcomes and horrible terms like that. But as it progressed, I realized that I couldn't, through making work, I couldn't help but move through these sorts of questions and dilemmas that were coming up in my research. I could only do it through my relationality with the city, and with how I experience or understand the trauma through subjectivity. And so I think in terms of how autobiographical it is, there is some of it, but not entirely. I'm very much following writers such as Sebald and Carol Maver, in that there is a lot of subjective, affective experience of my own that I implant, but I kind of, so I hide it in a way.
Great, thank you. Matt, there is one more question.
I found the questions now. I'm really sorry. I'm a bit inept at Teams Live. I had to go to published instead of the new ones.
There's Yolanda's question. Shall I leave it with you?
Yeah, got it.
Yeah.
So let's I've got I wanted to come back for another one with Emma in a sec, but let's just skip over to Fern. And Fern, there's a Yolanta says, I really enjoyed your presentation. It worked well with your voice over it, but I wondered if this is going to be printed with words later on. And I'll run from that into another one for you from Anna Logan. So, are you planning?
Do you mean planning to print the book or the talk?
I think what Yolanta is asking is, will the work be published with the written text that you were reading aloud, as well as the images, and that what you were presenting was mainly a flow of images with a voiceover of your own spoken narration. I hope I've got that right, Yolanta. I think you can always add another comment if I've misconstrued your question.
I actually haven't thought of that yet. Maybe I might release like a small book with it if I publish along with Loka. I think it would be quite a nice add-on, or I can have it at the back of the book so that they read it all and then they might find like a piece of the writing at the end, kind of like a nice surprise. I guess, I don't know, I actually haven't thought of that, but it's a good idea to be thinking.
That might come back in relation to another question, but I want to make sure that I bring in all the questions that we were sent. And Anna Logan says, hi Fern, thanks for sharing your beautiful book. How has the move from digital to using pencil crayons changed your relationship with your practice? Is there a sense of mindfulness that you feel from using hand drawing with pencil on paper?
Yeah, actually it's quite a huge shift for me, and I think working digitally kind of takes away being mindfulness, because you can do things really fast, and there's always ways like cheats and stuff and tricks that you can get that age done, or that kind of effect for each part of the image done. But you can't really do that with traditional, especially with pencil. If you want to do like a large area in the image, you will just have to keep using the pencil and making the lines to fill it in. And with digital, I don't think you would go that fine. You would just choose like a really big brush and just go with it. And yeah, I think it's traditional media. It definitely makes me more mindful and kind of taps in with my thoughts and stuff and process my thoughts.
Thanks, Fern, and that's a great, really glad that question came in. Just to the audience, apologies that we're having difficulty getting you off my face and onto other people's faces, so you're getting quite long spells of just looking at me while other people speak. Sorry
that's my fault, I'm afraid. I'm not on it.
Well, anyway, sorry that there's so much of looking at me while other people are speaking. Emma, I'm going to go over to you, and we're coming towards the end, so I want to there's one or two things I'd love to come back to. But Emma, one of the things that I find quite often I'm talking about your project not just your practice generally, but this project and the sense that seems particular to graphic novels of this kind of need to keep faith with it or play the long game. And this, I was just, you have talked about this, and you may not have anything else to say about it, but I'm just interested if you did have anything else to say about this, what it means and what it takes to hold faith with a project, while you might have other foreground concerns, you know, for years at a time, where you have to go and do something else, take on other work, you make a different kind of book. But there's just this, and it seems quite often, the first one I heard of, Audrey Niffenegger's first graphic novel, took 12 years. I can remember her saying that, and thinking, wow. So, any thoughts about playing the long game as a graphic novelist?
Yeah, definitely lots. So I think I began that book in like 2008, this project, My Other Mother. So that's getting on for 12 years, isn't it? So yeah, I remember actually, Matt, you said to me when I was on the MA back in like 2013, you know, you might never publish this book. You know, this book might never, you might never complete this. You know, this book. Yeah, I know. I was quite gutted at the time because I was like, I am going to do this book. You know, I was very determined that this book was like really important to me and it was going to be done. But actually, it was a really helpful thing to have said because, you know, and I remembered you saying that for many years after I left the MA, Matt going, you know, it would be okay if you never finished this book or if it never got published, because you'd still, you know, your point, I hope, was that my practice would still be meaningful and there would still be a lot that would come from that book, even if that book itself never saw the light of day in the form of a graphic novel. And it is completely true. And, you know, there's so much other practice that has come out of this book project. This book project's been simmering along. At times it's been like completely abandoned. At other times I've managed to sort of pick it up again. And particularly when other things are difficult or just full on, you know, like work, my teaching work, for example, or moving house or moving city or relationship problems, you know, all these things like take up a lot of energy and emotional energy as well as time. And so there's just been times where it's just felt like I haven't got the emotional energy or the time both to do this. But at the same time, it's kind of formed the sort of heart of my practice. It's like this project's been like the sort of the deepest part of my practice. And then there's a lot of lighter stuff I've been able to do around and in between. And I think being able to just keep a practice going, even if it's like initially after the MA, I felt a little bit embarrassed that I wasn't doing my graphic novel, basically because I just felt it was too full on, too much. I didn't have the resources to do it. But I was doing like, you know, pretty things, happy things. I was making prints that I was selling. I was making greeting cards. I was making like jolly, colourful, nice things. And I was actually feeling quite low, which is why I wasn't doing the book. And those more happy things were really supportive to me and also made me feel like I still had a practice. And yeah, I think over time that's like developed my skills, that's got me out in the world, that's got me to illustration fairs and comics fairs, that's got me new friends in the graphic novel illustration world, and it got me, I'm not going to flash it again, but it got me my other book published. And actually the reason that I have a publishing deal now for the graphic novel is because I wrote that whole other book, and it's the same publisher, and because they know that I can do it, I've written one book for them and they did it all right, they have been willing to take a risk on a riskier genre, a graphic novel genre, as opposed to a sort of art course book. But I don't think that would have happened if I hadn't got the other book done first. So it's been really interesting. It's been a really circuitous, slow, meandering route, and I've had to kind of go backwards and around and all sorts of things. And I've still not completed the book, and you know, I've got 2 years to write it now. I've got to write another book as well, by the way, to the same publisher before I write this book. So I've really got about probably 9 months after I finish the next book to write the graphic novel for October 22. And I, you know, it may be really difficult. I may not manage it. I may have to, you know, I may meet more obstacles. But yeah, it just feels like I've stuck by it on and off this long, and it's been quite a complicated relationship. But yeah, I just feel like it will eventually happen. Yeah.
Really, really great. Really, glad that you brought that in, because I think that that's come up again and again for people. There's this kind of obviously there's this kind of pejorative tone around pejorative phrase vanity publishing, but the fact is there's this kind of negotiated relationship between what you're doing just because you love doing it and what you're doing because you've got success doing it. And you just explained something, Graham, because I remember a student asked Graham Rule about this, and it was about Woman's World, and Graham Rule spending kind of, what was he doing, sort of 18 hours a day for 2 years in his basement, this mad collage project he was doing. And he said, how do you invest that much time in something that you've got no idea if it's going to come to fruition? And he said, which Graham Rule can get away with saying, he said, if you're doing what you love, it's never wasted. And I remember thinking, yeah, I really like that. I don't know if I'd have the nerve to say it, because it's like we're not trying to make work to go in shoeboxes under the bed, but there is. So that you just explained that Graham Rule remark to me, I think, or you unpacked it. Has anyone else got anything they want to pick up on around that idea of, is there like a kind of core current to what you do with your practice that the other things satellite around? I mean, obviously, I think in a way you've sort of shared what they are, and we could try answering the question for you or for each other. But does that strike a chord with anyone else? That sense of having one thing that's the background.
I wanted to just say it's kind of not exactly what you're saying, Matt, but just something that I really noticed. Where Louise is talking about, that kind of thing in academia where you're trying to validate your work through certain empirical terms, and then what Emma's talking about with the length of time spent with the project, or like having a core thing and wanting it to be about your own story and stuff that is personal as well as political, and how that can be reflected in the time it takes to make something, and how important that actually is. Like the fact that it is expected for things to happen maybe quickly or not be personal or be this or that. I think that just says that it builds an even stronger case for that to happen, because it means that it's not happening enough and it's not in the main, it's not out there enough. So anyone who's doing that has immediately got a really good reason to do it, especially anybody, and that means that story becomes part of the canon. And just because something it's your story, it's still going to go out there and be part of everybody else. So it's not an ego or vanity thing, really. It's joining in with everybody, And I think there's quite nice to think about books like that. Like there's kind of precious and special in one way, but on the other hand, there's a huge amount of books out there, and you're joining a large volume. I don't know, there's that kind of two sides to it. So I think there's no question that everybody should be able to do that, whoever they are.
Brilliant. I'm going to do something really a bit probably completely unfair, which is with 5 minutes left, Chloe, and while you're talking, something that I really wanted to come back to, and I was thinking, is this too much just to is this like a question I should just ask you one-to-one, because everyone else is going to go off on a tangent, but I think it was something you brought in really usefully, and it's a good sort of provocation, which is this idea of nature. We're always, especially in this kind of eco-critical context, obviously it's been kind of scrutinized and challenged, but you just made that really simple equation between nature and normativity, and this idea that the word inherently, this word has got baked into it, this idea that there is a natural as opposed to an unnatural. And I really buy that. I wondered, I've got my own kind of pet theory about how to circumvent it and shake it off, but I wondered what yours is, how you presented the problem, and in a way you implicitly presented the answer, but I wondered if that struck a chord with you.
Yeah.
With 4 minutes left. No pressure.
That's quite, I mean, I don't know. the answer. I think that for me, I find it at the moment, I'm finding it really useful to use technology as a way to deal with the question, because it's often pitted as this kind of like good and evil, like nature good, technology evil, and it's like flattened out into this technological world that's just like one thing that everyone understands is that. So I think for me, it's like investigating the questions that happen within technology and making work as an illustrator. So like trying to make it specific and not get too, because otherwise it would just be insanity. But like, yeah, thinking about that and trying to find places where there are conversations happening about that in order to kind of think about it. And I think like there's probably not like a one answer of like, oh, there's a new word for nature or something like that. But I think that's part of the whole point of the discussion, is that maybe having the vocabulary to talk about things is really important, and the vocabulary is probably just changing a little bit. But yeah, I've been looking at I don't know if this is completely on a tangent, but I've been looking at this digital art thing that's going on, where people are selling digital work with a kind of something that's generated by blockchains, and it's a kind of unique code token that's given to that work, and they're selling for kind of millions of pounds or thousands of pounds, and each blockchain takes the energy of, you know, maybe a country's whole energy usage for like 6 years or something, like ridiculous. Like, it's absolutely crazy. And I don't know what I think about that at all, but it's just like finding these little places where people are talking about what it means. So by that happening, people are saying, well, how much energy does it take to make a book, and how much energy does it take to make a t-shirt, or, you know, the comparable kind of things. And, you know, everybody immediately jumps onto the technological kind of thing as being the, you know, the one that's creating the most energy, but actually everything needs to be questioned across the board. So it kind of starts to tangle up everything. It's a bit like those, you know, the books like that Anna Singh book, where she starts looking at this like one mushroom, and then suddenly you've got this like huge kind of thing, a huge big research project going on. So yeah, I don't know if that's a straightforward answer, but I'm trying to kind of like choose my places that I'm looking at and focus on them, and in that way like think about, and you know, that whole nature thing is from one specific piece of writing that one group have written, so it's just one idea saying that
the xenofeminist.
Yeah, just saying that by natural, like if something's natural, you know, if something's not natural, if it's supposedly, you know, if it's not deemed to be natural, if somebody identifies differently, or if somebody has a disability that needs treatment, or, you know, all of that kind of anything like that. So yeah, I think it's a really interesting way in to start to think about these things, and relevant because we're putting out as illustrators, as communicators, if that's kind of what you're doing. Yeah.
Really great, lovely. I feel like for me that's been a real theme in loads of the talks this week, and it really came up in yours. And it there's a space there between the kind of questions that arise when we're making work and the kind of questions that arise when we're trying to find names for things. And I just wondered, coming to this Q&A, and I was thinking about that question for you, and thinking, is it like maybe if we're trying to find another word for nature, we haven't understood the nature of the problem, which is not, you know, do you need a singular? Is it meaningful to have? Is there anything coherent about there being a singular noun? You know, is the problem with this idea of the thing, the thingness of it? Anyway, blah blah. I think that's what you might call one for the pub. And I look forward
Matt,
but it's 12:30.
Yeah.
12:30. Is that what you're going to remind me, Nigel? I know it's time.
Yeah, there was just one final question. It may not be possible for us to have time to. It was from Hope. It was for Fern, but
well, I'll tell you what, Emma. I know Emma's starting your workshop in 1 hour, so it's a shout out to everyone else that Emma is starting her workshop in 1 hour. And Emma, I'll go ahead and if everyone else is good, I will relate the question for Fern from Hope. But Emma, if you want to slip away to start going and getting ready for the workshop, do by all means just slip out. So,
Okay, thanks.
thanks. And I'll sort of say a preemptive thanks everyone for being here, and then I'll come to Hope's question for Fern. Okay, so question for Fern from Hope Jepson. Listening to your talk was fabulous. I was intrigued by the world of Loka, and it came across to me how important the world is to you, also as the illustrator. I wondered how it came to you. Did it build up in your sketches over a period of time, or did you just know? I hope this makes sense. So I think I hear Hope asking about the world of Loka, that this world that opened up there.
It's actually kind of built up. The world of Loka was different in the beginning of the year, and then I stopped to make another comic, a small comic, and then I come back at it again, and it has changed a lot. And I think Matt, you on the journey of seeing the world of Loka comes to life. There's a lot of changes, and it just slowly comes to me, I think. Actually, when I work on it, I actually don't know what Loka's world is, and I just keep drawing, and the world of Loka just comes out as I draw.
I wondered about a related question to that, which slightly links Hope's question to something Emma was talking about, which is one of the things I was thinking around when you were talking. I was thinking of Charlie Sherritt, actually. Do you remember Charlie? And Charlie's, he has these great long sustained projects, and then he'll often produce these very light touch small things that are kind of part of that world. They're like an offshoot from it. But that's a real classic, isn't it, of people who work with imaginal spaces, like Ursula Le Guin or Tony Jansen, or people that there is this kind of story world, and then the thing you're holding in your hands isn't the whole world. It's just like the adventures of this particular character in that particular context, or one. And I wondered if you'd thought of sustaining Loka's world with, things that might become little standalone things that kind of fruit out of it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think so. Because actually the talk and the story about Fern and Raven before the story of Loka actually sprang from the world of Loka itself. As I was typing, I just thought of, actually I couldn't come up with a story to go before Loka's, and as I keep writing it and rewriting it, that story just come up, and I just write it within like a day or two maybe. So but sometimes I often think about mini story of maybe a creature in the world of Loka and their story. But yeah, I definitely would like to explore and ponder upon the other world of Loka a bit more, and maybe make something small from that universe.
Brilliant. Well, you must keep us in touch, and look forward to seeing the next iteration.
Thank you.
Is there anyone? We've gone for an hour and 5. It's been really great. I've really nice to kind of unpack a bit more of what you said in the talks. I don't know if any of you, if there's anything I've glossed over. I hope I've not missed any questions. I think we've brought them all in. If there was any in the Teams channel that slipped the net, I apologise, but I think we've got them all. Chloe or Zoe, anything else you'd like to bring in before we go?
I've got questions for Louise, but I might just send them to you, because really practical PhD questions.
Oh no, yeah, I'm up for that.
Cool.
Great.
You want to grow grey hairs, because that's a really effective way of doing it.
No more, please.
Yeah. That sounds like a good conversation to have. Well, then, in that case, thanks everyone for coming, and to our four presenters. That's been really great. And so the last things we've got coming up, we've got Emma's running a workshop from 1:30 this afternoon, and then the day ends with a Q&A with Hugh Locke at 3:30. So if you follow the link there, that will lead you to where Hugh is, and there may be some twists in the trail, but the link will lead you. Just follow where the link takes you, and you should find yourself in a Q&A with Hugh Locke. So look forward to seeing you there. Have a good lunch, everyone, and thanks for coming.
Bye. Bye, Fern.
Bye.